That is kind of cool music, Dan.
That
I
was.
I do like that.
That's right.
We'll do a special shout out to my friend Jesse Miller, who has written a lot of music for me. He is kind of collaborating with me now on several projects, and he writes some wonderful stuff.
That's good. You
Cool.
did a good job for sure.
Hmm.
So we are here again tonight. Francis Schaeffer, Truth Amidst Tension. I really liked the book when I first read it, and we talked about that. And so I'm glad that Dan has agreed to go ahead and do this. Francis Schaeffer was certainly an important force in the area of apologetics. Of course, not everybody was thrilled with him, but not everybody's thrilled with everybody. So that doesn't mean a lot.
True that.
Everyone has their naysayers of some stripe or another, but I
Mm.
I really like Francis Schaeffer's way of thinking. I find on a personal level that I am probably more like him than I would be with some other apologists, but that's why I really like his stuff. So tonight we're doing what are we doing? We're doing something important here.
Well, tonight, really focusing on Schaeffer's concept of beauty in apologetics, and then also the nature of things when we talk about organic communication with non-Christian believers and pre-evangelism. So we'll kind of get into that.
So okay, I know you're going to talk about this as we go, but just a brief description of what do you mean by organic apologetics. It's not
Well,
like you're eating organic food while you talk or
yeah,
something like that, right?
yeah. I mean, in this, I don't. I mentioned that, and I didn't go into the great depth of that. Uh, but what it basically means in essence is, I mean, we're talking about what Schaeffer talked about with the basics of the philosophical questions, right?
Right.
And along with that, you're dealing with people before you that are um, created in the image of God, and it's important that we treat them naturally in that relationship. That we're not becoming salesmen. That we're not becoming um, people that are just trying to uh, prove them wrong per se, but we're trying to uh, exemplify what Christ has given us and why it actually is something that we can commend to them. And Schaeffer hopes for us to understand how do we get through to that path. And so that's a lot of what we deal with tonight.
Right. And now this is really important before I turn it over to you, because
Mm-hmm.
it is something we have I think you and I have mentioned this in previous ones, but we talk about it a lot at MCOI. When we get a phone call from someone that says, I am meeting with fill in the blank, a Jehovah's Witness, a Mormon, Wiccan, what verse do I give them to get them out? So they're starting off with the idea that I have already the answer that's going to lead them to the faith without even knowing what it is that they believe or are rejecting or are even thinking about.
Mm.
Yeah,
So then when I pointed out, they go, well, what would you do? I said, well, I would ask them a question.
yeah, because and one of Schaeffer's big points with respect to that is being personal,
Right.
because so much of the world wants to dehumanize
Yeah.
man, and we're to really be a contrast to that as a demonstration of what Christ has done in His victory. And I know Mr. Gandalf had started to speak, and I want to default to him if he has anything he wanted to mention.
I was just going to say the opposite of organic would be mechanical. So
Hmm.
Dan's been stressing what Schaefer stressed, which is you can't turn this into a formula. Uh, it has to be personal. It has to be from the heart, and it has to be natural. You can't make it mechanical and say, okay, here's the 4 points. You cover these 4 points, and then you ask for a decision. It sometimes maybe that works, but you can't be limited to that. It has to be something that grows naturally out of the conversation with a real person.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think about that sometimes in various groups that I grew up in, and there was very much a proclamation of the gospel, but not a lot of time listening to the individuals and what they were struggling with, and and things that they needed in order to help them understand. And at the same time, I don't think there was really a forum for them. And I think that's a kind of speaks volumes about where we are at times, or have been at times in the evangelical movement. We are really good at proclaiming the gospel, but sometimes we're forgetting everything else that goes along with that, to kind of preface it, to give it context, to give it meaning, rather than it just being a slogan or advertisement or just some flash on the screen that, hey, accept Christ, Jesus saves. But because the onlookers, if we put ourselves in their mindset, we'll see that it appears shallow to them. It appears almost meaningless, because you're just another trip. You're just another mindset. And that's what Schaeffer highlights. He said it's just another kind of trip. It's an evangelical high, and you're not really getting at the substance. And that's what Schaeffer, in the whole of his apologetic, is trying to get us to.
Right. So that's a 1993 Parliament of World Religions. Joy and I went. There was about a dozen of us. As we were approaching the hotel where it was being held, there were Christians outside. They wouldn't go inside. Outside on each of the corners and midway in the block, with big signs and bullhorns, repent. And as I was walking in, I'm going, I understand what they're saying because I'm a Christian. But we have Hindus and Muslims and witches, and they have no idea what they're talking about.
Right.
So I don't find that that's helpful, frankly. But
yeah, there's a book, and I don't mention it here, but Schaeffer wrote a little book called The Lord's Work and the Lord's Way. And one of the things he talks about is that we have to learn the language of the culture that we're speaking to.
Right.
And so what's interesting to me is I found this, we talked about the basic philosophical questions. Well, I talked with a guy one time, and it was like, I was explaining to me, he was a Christian, but he'd come out of kind of some strange philosophical backgrounds. And so when he heard me explaining Schaeffer's terms, he's like, oh, I've heard that before. Oh, I've heard that. And he knew some of the origins of what Schaeffer was speaking of.
Right.
And it actually resonated with him. And I think that's important for us to think about, is that we need to begin to shape our understanding and our approaches to best meet our culture. And Schaeffer often used this illustration. If we're, I think he borrowed it from Martin Luther, because if you're speaking with the loudest voice and proclaiming the gospel, but you're not proclaiming it with, to the people in, their understanding and where they're at, then you're not really doing anything at all. And I'm probably badly butchering that that paraphrase there, but that was one of his maxims.
Well, it's kind of like when I was working instruction, I had people from all different parts of the planet speaking different languages. And one of the things I would observe is, and you probably have seen this in other settings, you would have two people from different countries that don't speak each other's language at all. And so they would progressively each speak louder to the other one, somehow assuming that if I speak louder, you will understand more clearly.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't really work that way.
Mm-mm.
Well, as I'll go ahead and dive right in here. Of course, let's start off with just a little bit of review, and I think it connects to what we're talking about. Of course, we mentioned the historical origins and context. It's important to put Schaeffer's apologetic in its historic background, because it'll lend understanding to us as we start to evaluate the principles that he puts forward. And we'll see that tonight in particular ways as well. I mentioned the methodology concerns that we have, that sometimes so much of the apologetics that you'll run across with the analysis of Schaeffer tends to get bogged down in that methodology debate, and sometimes exclude exactly how to do Schaeffer's apologetic. And so then we want to get at what Schaeffer's real approach is. And so we talked about one of the foundational principles, and it's called the basic philosophical questions. Well, there's a book. I think could you enlarge my screen just to me real second? I don't know if you can see right here. There's a book right behind my shoulder here.
Oh, your personal screen. Yeah, I can definitely do that.
I don't know, but
I do that here.
So that book right there is Speaking the Historic Christian Position in the 20th Century. So we can go back to the slide, but basically I'm sorry, it's over here. So that's the one. I'm sorry. So that's his basic Bible studies. But anyways, so completely wrong.
I get the point now.
Yeah, you get the point.
Yeah.
But speaking the historic Christian positions into the 20th century is applying the Christian gospel message to the basic philosophical questions. There's a reason why we have creeds, why we have an understanding of our doctrine. It's for that purpose. When we talk about creation, fall, redemption, glorification, and we talk about the moral dilemma and sin and salvation and sanctification, we're dealing with all the things that are part of the philosophical questions. We're just using the Christian terminology for those things a lot of times when we're speaking of them, but the world would be using the philosophical questions. And much like what Schaeffer read when he first checked out that Greek philosophy book when he was first coming to faith himself. So if we go back to our slide now, the other one that we had was the demonstration of truth. That with Schaeffer, it's on another level. It's not just that what we're saying is true, but that everything that we are talking about is true to what is, and it's true truth, as he said. And so if you really truly understood it, you would be truly excited about the Christian answers, because they answer everything in regard to the philosophical questions. And when we're talking with a person, an individual, and they're dealing with their various issues, we will hear them state something of their worldview, something of their thought. Their words carry with it something of their own analysis of those basic philosophical questions, whether they've thought deeply about them or not. They've assimilated some of that understanding from their worldview, from their life. And so when we demonstrate truth, we're showing them a contrast. And that's so important with Schaeffer's thought. Then he talks about one of our problems in this area, and he uses this illustration of the two chairs. He says each person sits in one of two chairs, either the naturalist chair or the supernaturalist chair, and he perceives everything in the universe from the perspective of that chair. When an individual is born again, he moves from the former chair to the latter. The tragedy is that even after a Christian has affirmed the supernatural, it is perfectly possible for him in practice to move back to the naturalist chair and spend most of the rest of his life there, seeing things from the same perspective as the world and living on the same basis. If a man does not believe the promises of God for salvation, we say he is in unbelief. But the position of a Christian who sits in the naturalist chair is what I call unfaith. Many Christians live much of their lives there. Now, there's a reason why I'm stating this, because as Christians, we tend to sometimes fall into that. Think about this also in the area of sin. When we sin, aren't we saying something to the effect that, well, God's not watching? If we really acknowledge the true presence of God, we would be thoroughly humbled by that notion, and that notion of spirituality, because the depth of understanding cultivates something of who we are in God's world. We're connected with him. He sees everything, and he's right there. True spirituality is right here, as Schaeffer said. It's right before us. And so when Schaeffer talks about this in his own personal life too, he's also very firm on acknowledging this concept that that the supernatural is really real, in contrast to everything that the naturalist says. You know, you may recall his event where he was on the airplane nearly crashed, and all of a sudden the engines just came back on while he's praying. And he talks with the guy and says, "My Father in heaven started it." He knew the supernatural reality, and he acknowledged it, and he wasn't afraid to say so. One thing that touches on this and maybe connects it with this next notion of taking this supernatural reality into the scope of his discussion on beauty is that I had an experience too where I was stranded in the backcountry of in Rocky Mountain National Park for 2.5 days. And I was stranded there. We went on a hiking thing, and we misread a contour on a map and hiked into a vacant area of the park, and it was above 10,000 feet, and we kind of got locked in. And so then we had to hike our way out, which was a significant hike. And we were locked in this basin, and we were hiking over these rocks that were, gosh, as big as, some of them were as big as semis. It was just crazy. So we're climbing and crawling and everything. And then at above 10,000 feet, I had high altitude pulmonary edema. I couldn't breathe. So I'd take about 20 steps and I'd be exhausted. But the crazy thing is that all the while, after our first night, after sleeping on the ground, we had like day pack provisions, sleeping on the ground, we got up and I looked at the beautiful mountains and the sky, and I'm like, it's okay, God's here, And so what you realize too, when you go through a situation like that, I went through, we were there for 2.5 days where I finally got rescued and got flown out. What you finally realize though, is that ultimately the only one that is real, God is there all the time. And the only thing that really matters is his reality. And ultimately I wondered why don't I acknowledge God like that on a daily basis? Because he's all that I have. Mm-hmm. And when you get to that place where he is all that you have, you understand something of the beauty of what God is. He's not just out there somewhere. He's right here with us, and he's all around us, holding us and sustaining us. I'm trying really hard not to get too choked up here and cry. But the tenderness of what God teaches in those moments is that we find out what ultimate reality really is when we come to the very end of who we are, and we realize that my life and breath are being sustained by my Creator. Yeah. And it's all that I have. Yeah. So as we think about that's beauty and tension. You're dealing with, I had the tension of personally of life and death Yet at the same time, there's God testifying to me through all of nature. The sun was up, it was shining on the mountains. There was beautiful landscapes and everything. We just crossed over a glacier, and it was quite amazing. But at the same time, there was real tension and real life and death scenario.
Yeah.
So, and this is why Schaeffer speaks to me so. And it was interesting with this. That's not the only reason, but one of the reasons why I think God in its providence kind of took me through that situation, just to show me something of this. It's not a girly apologetic. I mentioned the scholar that called Schaeffer's notion of apologetics a girly apologetic. It's a mistake to think that it's not that, but it's not merely aesthetics either. He's not just talking about how things look. He's not just talking about art with a capital A, as he says, but he's talking about that truth is beautiful and has real implications for life. And there's behind that beauty is all kinds of joy and a tremendous demonstration to others. So whenever Jerem first talks about this, he talked about it in the scope of an apologetic meeting. This is kind of interesting too, because this particular talk that he was doing was on the basic philosophical questions, and it was basically the groundwork that later became He Is There and He Is Not Silent, and his book of that title. And it's interesting too, I think Don Williams was there and gave me a recording of the later progression of that. But this one was at Covenant Seminary, and this is how Jerem described it. He said, the primary reason I remember the lecture so well is that the lecture were open to the public, and all through the week, a handful of visitors would join us in the tiny seminary chapel. And I remember one man, an unbeliever, who came faithfully to the whole week of lectures. Schaeffer covered the three areas of existence, morals, and knowledge, and showed how in each of these areas, modern man, or his term modern man, today would say postmodern, is left only with the hell of alienation. Christianity, on the other hand, gives answers in these three areas, answers that are satisfying both intellectually and personally. At the end of the week, he finished by saying that the Christian answers, in the Christian answers, there can be true beauty in each of these three areas. The young man who had attended so faithfully became a Christian as that last lecture finished. So he was moved when he saw not just the truth, but the answers. And think about it like this. I use this phrase a lot, as one of my mentors explained to me. And I was going through some spiritual crisis at one time, and he gave me a book by Schaeffer, and then later would teach me this phrase: truth without love is ugly, love without truth is compromise. And then later I've added to it another thing: yet truth with love is beautiful. So if we think about that, the reality of what is being presented is that it's in contrast to everything that they're experiencing. They don't have answers, and the world is ugly, sometimes inhuman. It can be quite brutal. And then if they encounter the church who is just speaking love only and not giving any truth, then they see something fake and they don't want anything to do with it. Yet when they see truth in combination with love, it becomes a beautiful statement to them and something that they can identify with, and they want that. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. And so one of the things that Schaeffer does that is quite significant is that he realizes beauty. When he's talking to the individual, this is how it kind of plays out apologetically. All beauty is realized because all beauty is God's beauty. So it's not just art that we're talking with them about, or it's not just, things that we think look nice, but it is when we see beauty of any kind, it is something that we can speak to them about. Sometimes there's beauty in thought. It's beauty in mechanic of how things are made. There are some beauty in those areas as well. So when we're dealing with the individual, we kind of need to listen for notes of where they have understanding of some beauty, because all men borrow from God's beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we acknowledge that, then it gives us a place to speak, because guess what? They're in tension with the real world. They are believing something, but they don't have a basis for that. Mm-hmm. So I say, that's beautiful. Well, why?
Right.
What's your standard for beauty? And ask any thinking individual, what's the basis for aesthetics?
Right.
And why we think things are beautiful. If you go someplace else on the earth, then they may think, well, that's not beautiful. This is beautiful. It's subjective in that sense. But there's something innately beautiful about God's reality, and that the things that we hold true, and it's not subjective in that light. Even in sin, we create after our Creator. So Schaeffer would sometimes have these rebel guys that would come, and they'd be artist of types, and yet he could speak to them because they were creators. And so he would listen to their questions, but he'd also ask them about their creativity and compliment them even, and because he respected that, and not just saying it just to win them over as an apologetic ploy, but rather complimenting them because he truly believed it was beautiful. There's something about what they were doing that was commending their Creator, whether they realized it or not. Mm-hmm. And so we'll encounter people that have all kinds of creativity. And so imagine this, though. You're inviting people into your home, and if you don't live truthfully before them, then they will see that. If you invite people into your home, like the Schaeffer was doing at L'Abri, and they don't experience a beauty, but they're kind of like, yeah, you say a lot of nice things, but man, this place is filthy. What kind of consistency would that have with what he's saying? How would that commend it? And that's why it's rather providential in my thinking of why Dr. Schaeffer and Edith were so connected, because Edith was the creative, and she was the very into hospitality, and she warmed the environment. I remember talking with Sylvester Jacobs. He's the photographer that you'll see a lot of pictures that are taken of Schaeffer, especially those early years, are from Sylvester Jacobs, and he has a book out there called Portrait of a Shelter, which are actually pictures of the shelter, of all the different things. And he said that, the first time he came there, he came with a group, but it was a religious group, but at the same time, he was of the background of the 60s, and he's a black guy, and he had problems with just a lot of American evangelicalism, just because he felt sometimes the way blacks were treated weren't quite nice or respected. But he was blown away by he showed up there like 11 o'clock or something at night, and then Edith is preparing him a 4-course meals with flowers and everything on the table, and he's like, where am I? And what and Dr. Schaeffer would take time for him Dr. Schaeffer would go on walks with him and talk with him. That's the kind of beauty that he was immersed in, and it helped him heal in many respects and learn trust. And that in itself is a significant methodology. So this is what Schaeffer says about this beauty as the mark of the creator. He says, when we speak of personality, we can think of many, many things where people are said different from no life or different kinds of life. Non-life or different kinds of life. I would put the first as creativity. So this is quite important. Schaeffer would say that the first thing about humanness is creativity. By creativity, of course, I mean the arts, and I would say one of the distinctives of people as against everything else is that all people are creative. Nothing else is creative. You never find the animals as creative. It's repetitive. It's only man. Everywhere you go, every culture, every man, every woman, every child, they're creative in the artistic sense, but not just art with a capital A. The flower arrangement, the little child making his drawings. View little children. What are they doing? Making drawings. They're creative. As far as creativity, not as the level, but that's as much creative as Michelangelo. Then I move over and I look to other cultures. It is very different from what we would create, but it's creativity. I find a similarity between that and myself. The people who made that are me, if you understand what I'm saying. Now then, everywhere you find creativity, I think it's the greatest mark, because God is the creator. He has made those who reflect him on his high level of creativity. So everything, even that which is created by a non-Christian, may be blaspheming, yet the very fact that he creates is reflecting who he is as made in the image of God, whether he knows it or rejects it. And forgive my typo there. So think about that for a moment. What he's saying is that beauty that we're talking about is on the area of a mark of the creator. And so if it's connected with the basic philosophical questions, then it's part of humanness. And so therefore it's something that we can speak to elevate the understanding of God in that person. And so this is, even though you're talking about something which I think a lot of apologists may just kind of put out as maybe, well, that's ascetics, and so that's another discipline altogether. I realize for Schaeffer, that's not so. We're bringing this back into it because it directly relates to the philosophical question that man's dealing with, and it's who he is. He's creative, and almost every person we're going to encounter is creative in some way, and there's something that we can mend, and there's something that we can actually encourage them on to help them understand who they truly are as created beings. And that's what Schaeffer's getting at there. And so to take a little bit further, to me, the most marvelous thing of all creativeness is not artistic and cultural creativeness. As you know, I have spent much of my life enjoying this, yet the greatest point of creativity is that we are significant and can influence history. This is startling when you think about it. Nothing else does in the same way by choice. So consequently, in my mind, creativity is the center thing of humanness. So there he is stating that again. It's the center thing. It's the first position of humanity and humanness. So human relationships are ways that we demonstrate beauty at times. There's we need to learn to love our neighbor, the image bearer. And that is what is an image? It is something of God's creation. It's God's images that are being created. The covenants, when we think about God's covenants, we must acknowledge that God's creation covenant in respect of the levels of creation, meaning that there are levels to his creation as far as man and the state of man in God's creation and the state of humanness. And this is something I'll bring a lot of contrast into when we actually deal with this in the next class, because this is a point of tension. Realize that modern man very often dehumanizes man to make him an animal. And so if we don't put man in his proper creation order in God's creation, in God's image, as far as the imago Dei, in created man, then we are rejecting God's art. And so that it becomes a holistic thing in our life and apologetics. So our life is a work of God's art. The beauty of the personal is important to God. The beauty in total culture being reflected there is important to God. And so the whole of it is important and beautiful, or meant to be beautiful. And a lot of times too, it's beautiful in contrast to what's there. And we need to be acknowledging that as well. I don't know if anybody saw it, but there was this one video I caught where it was right after the bombing of Ukraine, and there was this musician in Ukraine, and he went into his home that had been bombed, and the windows are blown out and everything. And he goes there, and he has his piano. His piano is still intact. The windows are blown out. There's trash and just all sorts of debris all over the floor. And so he cleans off the piano just enough to open it up and starts playing. And he's playing in this destruction. There's something wonderful and beautiful about being the symbol of beauty in contrast to destruction. And that is in itself something that would seem almost impossible. But that's what Christ did. And so it should mean a tremendous amount to us.
You know, one of the things that you said sparked an idea in my brain that the Imago Dei, and many don't realize what that means. It is God giving us his communicable attributes. One of them is creativity. And as you were talking about the importance of that, it occurs to me the very first time we meet God in Scripture, it is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So, it's a really important aspect that I don't suppose I ever really thought about before. I don't think most of us think of the importance of that, just even that one statement, and how important that is to our life and our apologetic.
From the very beginning, that's what it started with.
Right. In the beginning, God created.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think you're drawing a conclusion that Schaeffer makes here soon too, because the nature of this is that we're surrounded by a world in which personality is increasingly eroded. If we who have become God's children do not show him to be personal in our lives, then in practice we are denying his existence. People should see a beauty among Christians in their practice of the centrality of personal relationships and the whole spectrum of life and the whole of culture. And so it's bringing that personal nature of a personal creator as well into this situation. And that personal relationship with a personal creator is the beauty. And so therefore, that's what we're trying to truly elaborate on as we think about this. So I want to give you a little bit of discussion time.
I think that's one reason why so many Gen Zers are now flocking to Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, is because they are very different from Protestant churches, and just the overall aesthetic. Like, like some of y'all might not understand this lingo, but like if Christianity were like an internet fandom, like the Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox would absolutely be the fan artists. Like the artwork in those churches is spectacular.
Right.
And I think because we've lost so much of that creativity and that beauty in mainstream Protestant churches, that's why they're drawing in a lot more Gen Zers, is because we want that more traditional kind of feel, and we don't want to be in a church basically that feels like, oh yeah, this was definitely once a Walgreens.
Right.
We want to be in a place that actually feels like, oh yeah, this is a house of God.
The refurbished warehouse feel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We're attracted to the aesthetic
About-
and energy.
That's
Yeah.
so significant, though, and I think that's something that I find in Schaeffer's cultural criticism as well of the, and is, he didn't just write that book, The Great Evangelical Disaster, without putting that title on there. He was really concerned that in a very real way, the church was kind of locked into its own positions with regard to some of these things and not really making the most of what God was displaying. If you take Romans really literally there, and Romans is a demonstration where God is Romans 1 where Paul talks about that God is demonstrating through creation. If you think about that illustration, then it's before all of us, and it's something that all of us need to make sure we elevate, but then also bringing in our personal creativity into the situation of our church life and home life and everything, and letting that flourish and be a demonstration of God. The craziest thing. So this tells you something of the L'Abri side of things. Was I went to a lecture at L'Abri, Rochester, and I forget the exact title, but it's basically something to the effect of dressing with beauty to the glory of God, something to that effect. But it was talking about just, and it was by a man about being a man, and properly dressing in order to convey something of the image of God in me and the art that was at work in me, and making it vibrant to others. And so I found that very profound, because that is something of what is still heavily a part of the L'Abri experience and what Schaeffer was trying to get at.
Yeah. Asterisk me says this occurs to me how dismissive the world is of people with disabilities, whether they are born with them or due to age. And then he goes on to say that there is real beauty in these people. I think that's an important aspect. Unfortunately, that happens in the church as well often.
Mm-hmm.
I find that Joy and I gravitate towards those who seem to be struggling in some way or another like that. And there's so much to them that once you interact with them, they sort of become alive again. It's interesting to watch.
Yeah, and it's something that I think all of us need to just continue to strive for. Obviously, we all have our gifts. We all have time constraints as well, but we make every effort, right? Where's our heart at? I think that's where it kind of picks up.
I have a church that I have spoken at quite often, and the individual had started it, Brian, love Brian. He made it a point, people who were handicapped in some way or another that wanted to serve, he found ways to have them serve in the church in public. They were the ones passing out the bulletins, doing the welcoming, doing stuff like that. They maybe couldn't teach it, but they could
do something.
Yeah, and contribute. It was really interesting. I was very impressed with that. So
that's cool.
Yeah, very important. Okay, so as we move forward, this organic methodology and pre-evangelism. As I said, you're treating the person as somebody in that context, and so the very first things that we need to make sure that we're clear on is that Christian apologetics, as Schaeffer said, should not have a citadel mentality. And I think we've mentioned this already, but I'll read this quickly. Christian apologetics should never be restricted to guarding against attack. We have a responsibility to communicate the gospel to our generation. Christian apologetics is not like living in a castle with the drawbridge up and occasionally tossing a stone over the walls. It is not to be based on a citadel mentality, sitting inside and saying, you cannot reach me here. If the Christian adopts this attitude, either in theory or in practice, his contacts with those who have accepted 20th century's thought will stop. Think about that for a second. What Schaeffer is saying is if we close off in that mode, we will lose contact with them. It's not about winning the fight. Sometimes we have to take a few blows.
Right.
And so apologetics should not be merely an academic subject, a new kind of scholasticism. It should be thought out and practiced in the rough and tumble of living contact with the present generation. So the way that we get at this direct connection with people is to lose that citadel mentality and begin to treat people as people. And that's why Schaeffer wants to take us there. And I think that's also one of the reasons why, too, I know is Don and I have talked about this a couple of times, is that, why he identifies a little bit with this, because it's more of a street apologist type approach, where I may end up just talking with people, in kind of a one-on-one debate or discussion. But even then, it's more personal even than that at times, because for Schaeffer, he's like letting them inside their house.
Right.
And so it's a whole new level, I think, of beginning to discern the thoughts and intentions of the person in front of you, and then also treating them with the respect as being created in the image of God. The next one here, methods in light of beauty and truth. So we're not restricted to defense. We are commending beauty and truth, but also highlighting tension. The next class will be all on how we do that, and it actually will be a lot more definitive in as far as like explicit examples about how we do it. But I think you're picking up at least from the illustrations and stories I'm giving about how this happens. But then also learning the roots of their thought and questions of the generation in the next. Check my notes here.
Well, we noted that.
Did you note that? Oh. So this is so important as far as Schaeffer's understanding in this area, is our walk should be such that even the blasphemer must know inwardly that we have dealt fairly with him. Rightness and love must go hand in hand, or there is no real power. So there's that truth and love thing again. Showing a man to be wrong is only the first step. The final aim must be to lead him to full obedience to Christ. In dealing with the unbeliever, our final desire for him must be his salvation, no matter how hopeless that seems. No man is beyond the infinite grace of God.
Right.
So, and this is an interesting testimony. I've had actually people find me on Facebook and message me and said, I didn't agree with Dr. Schaeffer. I'm not a Christian, but I totally respected the man. And that's happened multiple times. Now, was Schaeffer about trying to earn their respect? No. But he wanted to have the license to speak to them and give them the gospel. Mm-hmm. And what they conveyed to me is that he honestly did so. And he gave them the honest message. And he did it truthfully in such a way that was ever mindful of who they were as individuals. And that, again, we go back to those basic philosophical questions. Where did I come from? And we place them, what you were created in the image of God, and therefore I will treat you as created in the image of God, and I will respect your opinion, but I'll also tell you where it leads, and I'll tell you also what the beauty that's possible if you follow the true path. And this ability to speak that way with some of these people kind of amazed me sometimes, because some of these people said that, at first they were a little hostile with him, but at least they warmed up to his kindness and grew to respect him as being honest, and he truly believed what he believed. And they found that to be something that they could respect.
I have had some really interesting opportunities with a number of different people in discussion when I was in construction, for example, with unbelievers. And so, for example, I had some Jewish people I met with quite often, did work with, and we developed a relationship where they completely understood what I believed. They understood what the gospel was. It was always clear.
Mm-hmm.
And they were not ready to make any kind of a step. But I would get calls periodically from one or two of them, and the first question they would ask is, "Are you still a Bible banger?" I would say, "Of course."
Yes.
And they say, "Good, because I have another potential client for you, and I know that they can trust you."
Mm.
And then we would go on from there. So building that relationship that you're talking about is essential. Whether someone comes to the faith or not, they can still have respect for you in spite of their disagreements with you. And I think too many Christians miss that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's when you start being personal, there's something just tremendously powerful about that, because everybody, again, around them and all the world is always kind of dog eat dog, and if you take it to the Darwinist approach of survival of the fittest, it's brutal at times, and even some may have horrible family situations as a product of that. Not all, but some. And if you treat them and acknowledge their experience in this life, and see some of the things that they've seen, then it gives you a little bit more empathy to begin to help them, begin to speak to them, and to be long-suffering about it.
Mm.
Because, through God's grace, you've encountered what you have, and if that should make you all the more humble to speak.
Mm.
Just being truly thankful for what God's done for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this one in particular here, did I read this already? Make sure I read it. Apologetics, as I see it, should not be separated in any way from evangelism. In fact, I wonder if apologetics that does not lead people to Christ as Savior and then on to their living under the lordship of Christ in the whole of life really is Christian apologetics. There certainly is a place for an academic study of a subject called apologetics as the defense and the credibility of Christianity. But if it does not lead the students to use that material in the way I have spoken about in the previous sentence, one can ask its value.
Mm.
So Schaeffer was a little bit questioned some of the apologetic gamesmanship that was afoot. I think, and I've heard it from other apologists that I know, that they've witnessed far too much gamesmanship in the winning of arguments, and that being the only thing. Is as important as it is to defend the faith, we should also realize that we have a lot more of a a tenderness that we need to speak into the world to help them understand. So Schaeffer, in many ways, as Brian Follis puts it, had more of a pastoral approach.
Mm-hmm.
But in his church, people were regularly coming at different times who weren't Christians and sitting there and scoffing. Yet at the same time, he would be long suffering with them and continue to work through it. There's a couple books by people that are in also the same school of thought who have been very long suffering with people of this that would be considered completely outside of even acceptable Christianity, and they were through much long suffering converted just by that witness before them in that way. And I think you can discuss here if you want, but I think I'll keep it moving here. Let's talk about common ground. Let me know if you have thoughts that you want to share. So this goes back to kind of those basic philosophical questions again. There is a common ground between the Christian and the non-Christian because regardless of man's system, he has to live in God's world.
True.
And so as we realize that and continue to bring that to the forefront of our thinking, it's not just that we have the answers, but it's also that God owns the world that you're, sitting in right now. And some apologists have mentioned that, sometimes the non-Christian is sitting on God's lap so that he can slap him in the face. They've got this kind of mentality of maybe that they can speak against all these things against God, yet at the same time, they forget the fact that their very life and breath are being sustained, and they have no answer for why that is.
Sure.
And so this gets us a little closer here. The man without the Bible. Paul speaks in a special way to the man without the Bible. The man without the Bible has not suppressed special revelation, that is the revelation in the Bible, but the general revelation given by the mannishness of man and by the external world. It is then plain that the man without the Bible holds the truth in unrighteousness. He holds some of the truth about himself and the universe, but he does not follow it to its reasonable conclusions. Thereafter, a breakdown in morality occurs. I thought this was beautiful because all of us know of the Romans passage, but if we've studied apologetics at all, but this is Schaeffer's analysis of it. And and he's using some of his terms, the mannishness of man and the external world. That is the universe and his form. It's everything that is about mankind and the universe that he lives in are all around him testifying. And so when we're in the room with him, there's not only all of this speaking with respect to this, but all the beauty of this life is speaking to him as well. All of the sunlight is shining on him. And that is all making its statement to him as well. And so what he says with this is that the first truth that we let in, so the truth that we let in first is not a dogmatic statement of the truth of scriptures, but the truth of the external world and the truth of what man himself is. This is what shows him his need. The scriptures then show him the real nature of his lostness and the answers to it. This, I am convinced, is the true order of our apologetics in the second half of the 20th century for people living under the line of despair. And that under the line of despair is a Schaefferism. What he means by that is that, especially in the cultural position that we're in, so many people have such inclination in their understanding that they will have to have their own worldview stripped away so that they can actually begin to even hear the gospel. And so as we're dealing with them, we also need to understand that they have, in many cases, an obstacle or block. Now, I may have mentioned this, but sometimes, like I mentioned, the citadel mentality. I had an encounter with a guy at a work thing. I'm not sure if I mentioned this or not, but if I did, it'd probably be a good reminder of that. In contrast to this, is that I had a work encounter where I was working with these guys, and then we had a kind of after work party, and we're standing around there, and I don't know where it came from, but one of the guys said, "Why not for survival of the fittest?" And I spoke up and I said, well, without God, there's no basis for ethics or law. And he just said, whoa, like that. And then this other guy that was standing next to him grabbed a hold of me and pulled me through the group. And he pulled me off he said, come here. And he pulled me over the side of the room. And this is like a party thing, and a work party after in the building. And he's like, where did you learn this? How did you come to this understanding? And so for the next 2.5 hours, he forced me to tell him the gospel. So we don't always have the situation where we have to expect a battle,
Right?
because they're already dealing with the line of despair in their life. And so they may encounter some things that really shoots at that line of despair, that kind of cracks it open enough. And so, and he had been raised in a Muslim country before he came to the U.S. And so he's like, so when I got to the part about God's grace, he made me tell him 3 times. And I was like, man, this sounds like the Trinity in its providence speaking here. But so, okay, explain that thing about grace again.
Yeah.
Because he'd never heard that.
Right.
And so it's a tremendous thing. Now, I want to tell you a story. And this one is about a man named Douglas James. This is a guy that was on the Francis Schaeffer Studies Facebook page. And he told me about his time whenever he was at L'Abri. And so he's at L'Abri, and one night he's up late. He's up late with Dr. Schaeffer, and he's talking into the night. And it's kind of argumentative. It's kind of back and forth, this and that, a lot of just deep stuff. He's really troubled. And finally, Dr. Schaeffer just stops him. He said, Douglas, can you do me a favor? I'd like you to just go outside for a little while. Take a break and look up at the sky. Look at the stars. Look at and then come back in and tell me what you see. And so Douglas James did that. He went outside, and imagine this: you're in the Alps, you're in the Swiss Alps, and where L'Abri is, and you're looking up at the beautiful sky that is wide open and full of stars and just amazing. And he's standing there looking at it. And after a while, he just comes back in, and Dr. Schaeffer asks him, what did you see? And Douglas said, I don't know, but something changed inside. And I give that illustration because, man, the beauty of creation and the beauty that is testifying all around us and inside of him, we're connected. That creation was speaking to him, and his body and his physicalness, his humanness, acknowledged it in some sort of way that he couldn't even explain in the moment. But he realized then that something had changed about his heart and his mindset. And so after he went back in and began to talk to Schaeffer again, Schaeffer actually begins to unpack everything and explain the nature of the gospel to him and the Christian answers. And he comes to an absolute confession of faith. And I think that is so important for us as we think about what Schaeffer's driving us to with these concepts, is that we acknowledge the whole reality, both in our life and godliness, but also in our apologetic. And I'll give you this one here. So begin where Christianity begins. And this is something that was mentioned by Don earlier. Christianity does not begin with accept Christ as Savior. Christianity begins where the Bible begins, and that is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's something of our reality that is true. That's what Christianity is. It's I always find it interesting when some people will say something of Christianity began in just the New Testament portion, and they go forward from that, and that Christianity doesn't go back to those old days. It's all about Jesus. I would say, well, you don't understand the context here. Jesus is the Word. Jesus made the heavens and the earth. Jesus spoke it into existence. This is Christianity. They're forgetting the fact that it's he was in the beginning. And so
it's interesting you go to that passage, because it really, that first line of John picks up the very same first line of Genesis, in the beginning God. And then in John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were created. Boy, there's a connection.
Oh, he elaborates. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly what I was thinking. The link from the Old Testament to the New Testament is all one straight story.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's so important to acknowledge that, I think, but specifically too, where Schaeffer's pointing us to is that when we acknowledge creation and we acknowledge our origins, and we acknowledge our connection directly with our Creator as well as our Redeemer, then we're getting the whole gospel, because He is the Redeemer that will one day bring us into eternity. And it's not something just isolated in some limited moral code or some vibrant expression of religion, but no, it's the whole person, the whole existence, the whole reality is before us, and that changes everything. It's something too that I'm regularly convicted by, as well as trying to speak to.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Any other thoughts?
If you're interested in this topic, there's some really good stuff on it that extends and deepens what Schaeffer's saying. His insight that creativity is central to the image of God. I would recommend G.K. Chesterton's book, The Everlasting Man, in which he tries to present man as being a purely natural animal, and it's ridiculous. It just doesn't fit who human beings are. And concludes that art is the signature of man. J.R.R. Tolkien's essay on fairy stories, his doctrine of subcreation, is very much along the lines of what Dan was saying earlier about Schaeffer saying that creativity is at the heart of the image of God. And the chapter on culture in my book, 95 New Theses for a New Reformation, tries to pull all that stuff together. So if you're interested in this, there's some good stuff out there that can help you continue to pursue it.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I will tell you, next week we will be getting into the specific handling of the the actual questions, specifically in the area of tension, and a concept that Schaeffer calls the final apologetic as well.
Mm.
And so, as we take this a little bit further, hopefully that will begin to wrap a lot of these concepts together and bring them together for you, so you can see them all in one. Each one of them, I think, are profound on their own, but it was kind of hard for me to separate them at times when I'm talking about them, because I'm continually wanting to jump ahead and speak to this, because there is such significant strength to what Schaeffer's getting at. And so next time, the next one will be in some ways a little more practical, even though this is plenty practical, but practical in a sense of what should I do? What should I do when I'm talking with someone? I think we're already learning about, okay, what should I be thinking about? What should I be listening for? And this and that. But how should I begin to approach it? And to me, the area of addressing tension is really something of a key method of Schaeffer. But it required all of this build-up and understanding of what his philosophical context behind it is in order to get there. So such my approach.
Perfect.
Sounds cool.
All right. So, everybody, we will see you all next week. And
God bless you all.
Yeah. Later.